The modern media, the new media, is a double-edged sword. There is a positive aspect of it, and if you are not cautious, it will have a negative and dangerous consequence. The positive aspect is that the definition of the public space, public sphere, has expanded. In other words, the YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and such, they have become extensions of physical sphere of squares and demonstrations and so forth. In that sense, there has been a global solidarity, the site for global solidarity in the definition of a public sphere in Iranian context that I think is extraordinary and unprecedented. But the negative side of it is not just that the government can abuse those that they have arrested and dismantle the cyberspace. The negative part of it, in fact, is much more hidden. The negative part of it is for cyberspace to become, to replace the physical public space. That is the danger. For people to become satisfied with this simulacrum of public space and confuse cyberspace activism, cyberspace political participation, etc., with the actual one. That is the dangerous part. So the more important and the more enduring element would be if the new media becomes integral to our understanding of public space, but does not replace it, because replacing it becomes, we will have a vacuous and unreal and fictive conception of public space, which never translates. So one should not be antiquarian and completely dismiss the new media. That's foolhardy. Nor should one just jump and live in one's laptop or YouTube and Facebook, which has a tendency, because Facebook has this extraordinary voyeuristic satisfaction that can replace and displace physical and social means of out in the street interaction. But to this day, my sense is that there has been the positive impact of social networking and cyberspace has much outweighed its negative impact. And Iranians have been very judicious in using it effectively, but not by way of replacing it. Right now, people are getting ready, for example, for the commemoration of 16 Azar, the student day in Tehran, and they are using, once again, both inside Iran and outside Iran, they're using the social networking by way of getting ready for actual demonstrations out in the street. If that were not to happen, I think the negative side will prevail. But so far, so good. I have no objection to a great photographer taking advantage of an extraordinary moment, taking a photograph of a woman on rooftop chanting Allahu Akbar, being recognized for the excellence of his photography. Photography is an art, and recognizing a great artistic achievement is a common practice around the globe, and I find no objection to it. The objection is if the celebration of the photographer, which is legitimate, to be transmuted into an illegitimate disregarding of the subject of the photography. That is, the photographer would be successful and richly deserving that award if the attention is taken away from the medium towards the subject of the photography, which in this case are millions of Iranians going to the rooftop very creatively, very ingeniously, chanting Allahu Akbar by way of registering their protest. So if these awards become a celebration of the photographer, the messenger, rather than the message, that's troubling and flawed. But if the giving of an award is a way of globally recognizing the subject of this issue, namely the transmutation of the messenger and the message, which is what great art is, medium and the subject of the media, I think the art has performed its task greatly. As for voyeurism, and for example, in the famous video clip of Nida wa Sultan, again, if you notice, we see a doctor, Arash Hijazi, attending to, because he was a physician, he is a physician, attending to the medical need. I mean, the woman was dying, there was very little that he could do. Attending to the medical needs of the victim. And then others are recording it for posterity, for global attention, and etc. Again, if I had seen a video in which everybody was an observant and is just watching or taking a video and nobody is attending to the victim, I would have been deeply, deeply troubled. But the fact that there is a doctor attending to the victim, and others have the presence of the mind to even arrest the man who evidently was responsible for this shooting. So that is also taking place. But somebody, one or two camera, are also recording the event. The balance is perfectly legitimate to me, so far as that particular incident is concerned. So yes, I am wary of voyeurism, for this to become so repetitive that in fact the sign becomes reality sui generis, as Guy Debord argued in 1967's book, The Society of a Spectacle, La Société Spectacle. But nevertheless, the visual fact that we see a physician attending to the victim is a balance that not everything has been sucked into the sign for global semiotic consumption. So far as people like me, the Iranians who live outside Iran, are concerned, I think what is happening with the new media, the whole fetishization of inside and outside has dissipated. And as I have always said, there are Iranians who live in Tehran, there are Iranians who live in Shiraz, there are Iranians who live in Khorramabad, and there are Iranians who live in London or New York or Tokyo or Austria. So the distance, this territorial fetishization of a map with political boundaries, I think the new media has, to a significant degree, trespassed that boundary. So I am not particularly troubled by the fact that we are outside Iran, because the inside-outside binary is questionable. There are certain things that people can do inside Iran if we were to follow that binary, and there are certain things that people can do outside Iran. There are blind spots that if you are living in Tehran, and the blind spot is not just limited to what's happening in New York, the blind spot also has something to do with what happens in Ahvaz or in Tabriz or in Sanandaj. And there are also blind spots that those of us who live in New York or in Vienna or anywhere else have. The key to it, and what I believe is beginning to happen, is a dialectical relationship for us to correct each other's blind spot rather than exacerbate them. This is the synergy that I think is happening because of the new media, that an article or an interview is done by a colleague from Tehran University, and I read it almost immediately as he is publishing it or as he is giving it on television, radio, etc., and vice versa. I have done an interview or written an article, and again, colleagues in Iran read it and react to it, etc. So there is a complementarity, I believe, that is happening, over which complementarity the security apparatus and intelligence apparatus of the Islamic Republic cannot have total control. Now, there are obvious limitations. Those who live in Tehran have certain political and military limitations that affects their vision, and there are also certain limitations that people outside the purview of those limitations have by virtue of not seeing demonstrations in Tehran, not getting up in Tehran and going and buying their bread and knowing how the weather is and so forth. So there are limitations, but again, the new media has so far provided the space that to some extent overcomes that limitation. So the same material evidence that comes out of Iran, demonstrations, activists going to jail, reports of torture, reports of heroism, resistance, signs of labor uprising, women's rights movement, the student movement, everything that is happening inside Iran, the implosion of the Islamic Republic, that are indices of a society moving towards institutionalizations of democracy, is abused by the new conservative and new liberal contingency of American government in order to say, oh, there is a democracy movement in Iran, we ought to go and help them, and by helping them they mean imposing economic sanctions or even engaging in war. Two things that will in fact immediately impact ordinary Iranian people. Already we are witnessing, because of these economic sanctions, the burden is on ordinary Iranians in terms of food items, in terms of drug and necessary things that people need for their daily living. And even talks of military strike by Israel and by United States, which are in fact the only condition that the Green Movement will fail. It will not help it to succeed. So, but at the same time, the same material that comes out of Iran are signs of hope, indications of a society in organic solidarity with itself and determined to achieve its rightful democratic institutions if it is left to its own devices. I think it is very natural for ordinary people in Europe, in the United States, that see one of the most magnificent non-violent civil rights movement in contemporary history to want to help. This is something usual, something normal. Because in an area infested with violence, suicidal violence, genocidal violence, homicidal violence, over a year and a half, we have seen a civil rights movement that not a single Molotov cocktail has been thrown by any one of the people participating in these rallies. I think for Europeans to help, people around the globe, United States, Asia, Africa, Latin America, they have to recognize that there are three major social movements in Iran: women's rights movement, labor movement, student movement. If you are concerned with the civil rights of women, equal rights for women, and you want to help, connect with your counterparts in Iran, follow the work of Shadi Sadr and Nushin Ahmadi Khorasani. There are a whole group of them, Mehrangiz Kar, Shirin Ebadi, etc. Understand what is happening inside the women's rights movement. If you are a laborer, a member of a union, and you want to help, connect with your counterparts. There are unions in Iran, they're under tremendous pressure, and you can help. The other part of it is that progressive elements in Europe and United States who are wary of warmongering of United States or UK or Israel in the region, it is false to assume that Mr. Ahmadinejad is the champion of the poor and the labor class. Learn about the labor class. Learn about Mr. Mansour Osanlu, a union leader inside the dungeons of the Islamic Republic. Islamic Republic does not tolerate possibility of independent, autonomous labor unions. This is the way ordinary people, in their capacity as students, in our identification with women's rights movement or with labor movements, unions, they can help.